I got money on my mind. I'm just trying to get some dough. I ain't picking up my line unless it's money on the phone.
So you were working at this financial services firm. I mean, you're learning all these things about personal finance, learning how you can help strategize with all these with people. When did you decide to move on from there and launch CapitalWise?
Great question, man. So yeah, I was there, and that's where I got like my licenses, my training, all that good stuff. And because it was 100% commission setup, right? The whole setup was like, I think it started out like 90, 10, and then it like went down to like 80, then I think tapered off at 70. But, humbly speaking, I was killing shit. You know what I'm saying? And so like when the money started coming in and it was like, okay, they're giving me back office support. They're giving me, a couple of things, the office space that I can leverage. Those were all quantifiable costs. So I went from being a financial advisor to a business owner, an entrepreneur. I started counting the cost, right? And I was like, okay, if my revenue keeps going up, but your percentage remains the same, that means that I'm going to pay dramatically more for these fixed costs that you're providing me, right? Because I was smart enough to know, because of marketing, I was building up me. I never really built up the firm. I never went out and said, oh, Mass Mutual and HF Financial were the best thing since sliced bread. I was betting on me. I was bigging up myself, right? And just leveraging them in the background. And so I knew that my success wasn't contingent upon that relationship. And so I had a conversation with the managing director. I was like, hey, I really do like what I've been able to do here. I mean, you guys have been recognizing me for these awards and all this kind of stuff, which is great. But, I could give a hill of beans about recognition. People will do more for recognition than they will for money. And if you're an entrepreneur, you can use that as a leverage mechanism, which maybe we'll talk about later. But yeah, people will do more for recognition than they will for money. But I'm not people, right? Give me the money. And so you can give me all these little plaques and stuff. I'm like, but look, there's too much of a spread here. My income keeps going up and we need to cap off what I pay y'all. And they weren't trying to hear it. They're like, well, this is the model. It is what it is. And I was like, bet. Deuces. So I left. I was smart enough to somehow, I don't even know how to pull this off. Like I didn't sign a non-compete when I started working there. I guess they just thought I don't know what they thought. It was silly in hindsight, but I didn't sign a non-compete. So all my clients came with me, every single one of them. And so I left. And at that time, it wasn't CapitalWise. I had actually joined forces with another couple of other advisors at the time. And we built that practice for a little bit. And then I started to learn more and more about the industry and how I wanted to grow my business. And then ultimately, I switched from like a broker dealer model to a registered investment advisory firm, which is a fee only setup. And so that's how I kind of made that transition. I just like realized that, they were going to be taking too much of my money by me staying there. Right. And I was already 100% commission. So there wasn't any fear of like me feeling like, oh, what's going to happen if I leave here? I knew that my brand name, at least I felt like at the time, would have been strong enough to be able to still keep pushing.
That's real awesome. Quick, George. I'm sorry, Kelly. Before you ask your question, can you break down the difference between that broker and that registered investment advisor just a tad bit more?
Yeah, sure. So in the broker dealer model, basically, the advisor gets paid every time they place a transaction, right? So let's say you have an investment account with us, and I need to sell some shares of a certain stock, right? Whether we are cutting losses or we're selling because we're locking in the gain, I'm getting paid, right? And I didn't like that because I felt like there's a moral hazard. I'm like, okay, so people are literally hiring us, right, to be their financial advisors. I mean, granted, investment advising is just one piece of it, but they're hiring us for that. But at the end of the day, I don't feel that we should be getting compensated every time we place a trade because it creates a moral hazard, right? It's like, if I know I'm going to get compensated every time, not that I would do this, but I can see how advisors would just be churning accounts, right? It's like, oh, let's just move money around because anytime any transaction happens, we're going to get paid, right? So for me, I didn't want to be affiliated with that type of infrastructure. And so I had to kind of unravel that and transition into a registered investment advisory firm. So the fundamental difference is one is a suitability relationship, meaning that I just need to do something that puts you in a better situation than you were before you met me, right? So for example, if your money was in a savings account, and I put it in an ETF, right? Technically, right? You're in a better situation than you were when you came to me, right? Or if your return is just call it 5-6% and it was in a savings account, you're in a better situation than you were when you met me. However, as a fiduciary through a registered investment advisory setup, I have a legal obligation to do what's in your best interest, right? Like I can't tell you what's good. I can't tell you what's, decent. I have to tell you what's in your explicit best interest. And that's what I have to act on. Even if that means, let's just say, for example, for a certain client, there's a type of account type that maybe we don't do internally. And I have to send them somewhere else for that. Like, hey, look, we don't do this, but this is what you need. Right. I can't try to force fit it to say, you know what? Well, it's kind of the same. It'll still be pretty decent. Let's just go ahead and rock with it. Can't do that. Right. I could get sued. And so that's the difference between the RIA and the broker dealer world is they just have to do something that is reasonable. I have to do what's in their best interest. And you would think that should be the standard across the board. Right. But it's not.
And they talk about that in Money Master the Game too, man. But I got you, Kelly. Yeah, I didn't want to take over your question.
No, you're good. I was actually just agreeing with you about Money Master the Game, about talking about the fiduciaries and everything. But no, I was going to just say, talking about the moving firms, man, and really how it's interesting to see how people just move with the person that they're with, right? So your clients weren't loyal to the firm itself. They were loyal to you. And you leveraging that for yourself. I think that's one of the biggest things with investment advisors or financial advisors. That's one of the biggest things that people that are employed, they can leverage, right? I have an investment advisor, and he actually just switched firms as well. I have switched with them, because I'm loyal to him, not necessarily the firm. And I think that's something big that people need to realize. If you're working, find your leverage and use it to your advantage.
Facts, right? Especially now, build your personal brand. Like that's what matters. And the beauty of that is it gives you the ability to evolve, and people will still evolve with you, right? Because if they care about you as your brand evolves, as you try new things, because they're tapped into you, they'll most likely still, rock with you, versus if it's like you're selling them on the best products in sliced bread or the best investment firm that you're working with, then when you leave or you evolve or you transition, they're gonna be like, well, I thought you said that was everything. Why would we leave? Right? Versus if you're always focused on your personal brand, as that evolves, they evolve with you.
That's powerful. And I remember whenever you first starting out, they kind of told you, find 200 people that you can ask and get on board. But you was like, I don't really know people like that who have this type of money. So what was your strategy to marketing yourself and finding clients so you can be successful?
Yeah, great question. So again, another happy accident, right? So I was like, man, I don't know 200 people that would, number one, it was the first thing I thought before even knowing if they had any money. My thought was, I'm this young 22-year-old kid, right, who just left Coca-Cola for marketing. Ain't nobody about to trust me to manage their money. That was my thinking, right, originally. So I was like, why don't I come out with a different approach, right? Why don't I reach out to these people, these 200 people that I know, and say, hey, something like this, hey, look, I know you're probably already taken care of. I know you probably have it all figured out when it comes to financial planning and wealth building, but you're someone that I admire and someone who probably is connected to people who could use the services that I offer. So could I get some time on your calendar just to share with you what it is that I do? And if after I share that with you, if anybody comes to mind that I could potentially be a resource to, would you mind making an introduction, right? Here's why that was insanely valuable, but I didn't even realize it at the time. Number one, their guard was down. They didn't feel like they were being sold. Number two, everybody likes to help someone. It's like, oh man, he thinks that I got it all figured out. Man, I feel good about myself. I definitely want to help him, get to where he's going. Then number three, because their guard was down and I knew they didn't have everything figured out, it made it a much easier way to get in the door with them, because once they actually heard what I had to say versus their guard being up, like, well, I don't want to listen to this kid because he's trying to sell me. And by the time I got finished, they're like, you know what? I definitely can introduce you to some people, but this is a service that I could probably benefit from as well. So I end up being able to get referrals and still work with some of the people who it was a good fit for at that time. Because I got my start on the insurance side. A lot of what I did in the beginning was insurance, right? Life insurance, disability insurance, things of that nature, right? And so I was able to still get in the door with some of those people, and then they edified me to their community. So now I had third-party validation because they felt this need to help me because of how I came at them. So that was my strategy. And I was able to run with that for a while because I didn't have Instagram yet, didn't have any of that stuff. So I was really just pounding the pavement. Then I did a lot of networking events The firm that I was with at the time, they did a couple of press releases, like new advisor in Charlotte, just hired. So I don't think that really did anything. Honestly, that was just a credibility booster for when you Google me. But yeah, that was a real big play for me. And networking events, shaking hands, actually offline, what I'm saying, meeting people, building real relationships, and doing good work. Because if you do, it's no different than e-commerce. If I get the product in the mail, I get the product on time, and it's quality, guess what? I'm probably going to buy again, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's no different than a service-based business. If you do good work, right, what they're going to do? They're going to tell people about you. They're going to stay a client, which means recurring revenue, which means you got your base. So the real game is be who you say you are and do good work. Don't focus so much on customer acquisition that you don't focus on retention and activation, right? So that's the real hack, right? In 10 years of doing this, there's no one that you could ever meet. I know it's a public podcast on a very big platform. There's no one you could ever meet that could say, man, that George, man, it's a schemester, or he didn't do what he said he was going to do, or I didn't get the results working with him. And anybody that didn't, if they did it, they would gladly admit that it was on them and not me, right? So just do the right things, do good work, be who you say you are, overserve the people that you have, because people want to focus on scale so quickly, right? Mm-hmm. When the reality is it should be systems first, right? First, you want to focus on systems, right? Because this influx of clients that you want, this windfall, it's going to break you if you don't have the right operations, systems. Mm-hmm. Then focused on serving, right? Over taking care of the people that you have, that's going to give you a heightened awareness of what they want so that you can refine your messaging for the people that you want to serve. And then you scale, right? That's the process. Systems first, right? Then on the back end, you scale. System, serving, scaling. That's kind of my methodology, right? And I didn't want to rush the process and just try to put people through the door. It's like, let me make sure I have the infrastructure that can support that growth that I'm crying.
Man, I like that. The three S's.
I love that answer.
Three S's.
Yeah, I love it. The 3 S's. And I'm glad you touched on that piece in there about that infrastructure. Cause you were talking about everybody wants all these clients. Everybody wants to scale so fast. And we were talking about this off camera. People, we hear all this stuff about business. We hear all these numbers and stuff and it sounds sexy. But if you don't have that infrastructure, you're going to end up being a bad business person who owes money to the government. That's how it's going. You're going to owe money to the government or you're going to owe money to the people because you don't have stuff in line. So can we talk more about how you can, as a new business owner, start building infrastructure, and systems for new clients?
Yeah, man. Of course, it's going to vary based upon the nature of your business. But here's what I would say. If you got clients, naturally, you probably have a service-based business of some sort, whether it's agency, consulting, whatever, right? So the first thing you can do is have a really well-documented a CRM system, right? So what is your process from the moment someone opts into your free guide, right, to the moment that they're a client on retainer, right? What is that process? So I break it down into 3 steps, right? You have acquisition, that's getting the client. You have activation, that's providing the service that they hired you for. And then you have retention. And that's doing that more customer service work to really make sure that the client feels happy with their taken care of, right? So you want to make sure that you define the repeatable steps, right, that are in each phase of that process. You want to document it, right? So for me, my first ebook came from not wanting to repeat myself. But really, that was just the SOP. People kept asking me this information. So instead of resending this email, resending this text message, let me document. So your business is the same way. Document everything. Right. So when you bring somebody into the fold, it's okay, what am I doing here? How can I document that step? How can I make it repeatable? How can I make it delegatable? Because one day you won't want to wear all these hats, right? And you want to be able to delegate, but you cannot delegate what you can't articulate, right? So you have to have a process that's well documented, i.e. articulated. So when someone comes in, it's hey, look, this is the game. Because here's what's going to happen if you don't do that. You're going to feel the weight of needing help because you're growing, but then because you are growing and you're juggling clients and you try to go get help and just whoever can help you, you're not going to have the time to carve out to slow down to be able to get them up to speed. And now you got someone who's not operating efficiently. You're paying them, but you're not getting the most out of them because your process isn't well documented, right? So document everything. That's the first step, right? Make sure you have a way to track all of the responsibilities and communications with the client. right? You really want to see the lifetime value of that client. You really want to be able to tell that story. You really want to make sure nothing gets lost in translation. The best way to do that is to have a CRM system that's going to pull in all the data for each individual client. That's huge, right? Trying to find emails like, dang, what did I say? What was that subject line? That ain't gonna cut it, right? So having like a really good CRM system. Other than that, I would say like you really want to get out of the way, right? Like you want to set up your business in a way to where if you're the CEO, if you're the visionary, like whatever your role is, what is the thing that bogs me down the most, and how can I position that to be outsourced, right? Whether it's somebody that's doing it overseas, whether I hire my first admin person, but start to piece together the help that you need so that you can free yourself up to work on the business and not in the business. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
And I love how in there you kind of talk to hiring someone and the importance of a system, but I also kind of want to ask you, whenever you're hiring someone, how do you find someone who's matching what you're trying to do? Because sometimes your system could be great, but that person's just not a fit for your company. So how do you go about finding a person that's actually a good fit and a good mesh?
Man, that's the $1 million question, right? I heard this quote one time, and it said, if you have extraordinary systems, you don't have to have extraordinary people, right? And so if you think about McDonald's, right? I don't eat McDonald's, but it's an extraordinary system, right? And so that's why they can pay people $7 an hour to step in and plug into the system. So what you're talking about is more of like a culture fit, right? So what you want to do is, and again, sometimes it's really hard to read this, but the best thing you can do is to be vulnerable with them and give them the space to do the same, right? So, hey, look, we're a small business, we're agile, and because we're small, we're very tight knit in what we do, right? And so part of what's going to make this work is understanding, what you want out of this position, right? You can be vulnerable. Like I know sometimes people just want a paycheck, right? But just tell me, what is it? Where do you see yourself in this situation? Because just like most relationships, people leave for one of three reasons, right? They're either unfulfilled, right? They're undervalued or underappreciated, right? So undervalued, not getting paid enough. Unfulfilled, I'm not doing work that makes me light up, right? Underappreciated, they never get recognized for the things that they do, right? So figure out what makes them tick, get that information on the front end. And then if what they're looking for aligns, like give them that space and that autonomy and say, hey, just tell me, sky's the limit. We're a small business. Who knows where this relationship could grow? Like, where would you see yourself growing? And if where they see themselves going doesn't really align with the direction of where you cast the vision as an entrepreneur, you have a tough decision to make right then and there, right? Because here's the thing. When you want help and when you're hiring, sometimes people look more attractive than they really are because you feel like you're drowning, right? Or you feel like, man, I just need that help. So the question is, are you going to be objective enough in that moment to say no when you know it's not a good fit, right? And then when you realize it's not a good fit, are you going to be able to approach that person and say, hey, look, this is where we said we want to go. This is what's happening. It's not working out, right? Maybe there's a probationary period or whatever the case may be, but are you going to be objective enough to have that conversation? Or are you going to be like, man, well, it's going to put more work on my plate. I got to figure out who's going to do this now. If I fire them, I ain't really got the energy for this right now. And then now you're complicit in that, right? So really it's about objectivity as the owner of the company and understanding that sometimes you might not know it until you get in it, but to the extent of what's possible, be very transparent and vulnerable with them up front and allow them that same grace and just say, hey, look, we want this to make sense for you. This is not the Fortune 500 company where you feel like you got to wear a mask and say whatever you got to say to get hired, right? Like let's make this make sense or identify if it does so that we can save both of us some time and headache, right? And be willing to have that conversation.